I'm Brian Toohey, and welcome back to the Think Outside the Board YouTube channel. I'd also like to put in a little plug for my website, Think Outside the Board, where I run 2 columns that are Kickstarter related. One of those columns is an almost daily update that lists the Kickstarters that launched the day before, or on a Monday, it lists the Kickstarters that launched the previous Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And the other one is a recommendation column in which I try to pick out the best Kickstarters to recommend to people. Also, I would like to ask you to like the video, subscribe, and hit the alarm bell so that you'll be notified upon further video uploads. Now, the first thing I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit about the system that I have running for creating videos. If you watch my first video, you know it was a beast. It was, I think, almost a 3-hour video. And I talked about a lot of games, but I think there are multiple reasons not to do such a long video in the future. So here are some things that are going to change. So moving forward, I'm going to be doing 2 videos a month for the monthly update. And I think rather than calling it a bi-monthly update, which bi-monthly can either mean twice a month or every other month, which is a little confusing, I'm just going to call it an early and a late update. So for instance, in September, there will be an early September update and a late September update. And part of the reason behind this thinking is that if you've gone to my website at all, you know that through the two Kickstarter columns I run, I'm really trying to recommend the best Kickstarter games to anyone who's reading and following, and also do a very good job of providing you all the relevant Kickstarters that premiered the previous day. Now, I don't list everything, and part of the reason is I'm trying to immediately cut out any Kickstarters that either are just very shoddily put together or seem like a money grab by someone who's not really actually interested in making games, but just kind of wants to cash in. And I'm also cutting out the games that just look not that well put together. I'm curating quality a little bit. So anything just really high risk is not even going to be on there. Although for all the games that I do list, I do have some kind of a risk system so that hopefully I can communicate, what are lower risk and higher risk games to back. But I do try to hit, almost everything. And I'd like to be able to do the same thing in these videos. And part of my idea behind the website and the columns is that I wanted to create something that people could just quickly and easily go to and not have to spend a lot of time, looking through Kickstarter all the time to figure out what's new and what's there. So if you go to my website and, you just go there once a day, you can see all the new stuff. It takes away a lot of work on your end. You can see anything that's hopefully relevant that came out, and you'll be on top of that. And then when there's games that I recommend, that's kind of like a second notifier for you to say, hey, this game looks really good. Have I backed this or considered backing this? So I want to do the same thing with these videos. And I realized that in doing them just once a month, there'll be games that by the time I'm talking to you about them, the Kickstarter's already expired. And that's not really helpful. So what I'm going to do with the 2 different installments every month from now on is when I do get to the part of the video where I'm talking about Kickstarters or recommending Kickstarters, they're going to be Kickstarters that are currently running. So anytime you're watching these videos, shortly after they've posted, everything that I'm talking about should be a game that you can then go and back. Because it doesn't really seem smart for me to be talking about games that are already, where the campaign is completed and you can't back it. If I bring a game to your attention and you really, really like it, and you go to back it and you can't, what's the point, right? I feel like I've failed on some level. So we're going to go to the two videos a month format. Now, because my original idea had been to kind of do 2 passes through monthly videos. So for instance, one month I'd say, hey, these are all the Kickstarters that are coming up next month. And then the next month I'd say, hey, these are all the Kickstarters that I forgot to mention, or I didn't think looked that good, but now that I've had, more time to look into them, I'm kind of like doing a second pass and bringing those Kickstarters to your attention. I don't think that system's going to work that well. So as I said, I'm not going to be doing that anymore. But because my first monthly video is for July and we're now in August, there are some games that I missed in July or in the beginning part of August where the campaign's already ended. I'm still going to talk about those games today and today only. Some of them do have late pledge options. So for the ones that have late pledge options, I will be mentioning that. So if I am talking about one of those games and it interests you, you'll know, okay, this is a game that I can still go and make a late pledge on. In the future, I will not be doing that section. I will instead just be doing a thing where I talk about the games that I personally backed since the last video. So I will be talking about all the Kickstarters that are currently running, and then on the following video, I'll talk about the Kickstarters that I actually backed, because I am going to be talking about a bunch of Kickstarters, right? Probably, let's say on average, I'm doing 2 videos a month, and in each of those videos, I may be talking about 10 Kickstarters. So that may be 20 Kickstarters a month when you put both videos together. I am not going to be backing 20 Kickstarters a month because I do not have that kind of disposable income, disposable money at this point. So even though they're games that I think look great, I can't back everything. And so there will be this kind of like follow-up where I will briefly talk about the games that I actually did back. So out of those, 10 games I'm talking about in my early or late video each month, I then may back 1, 2, 3, 4, somewhere around in that range. That also means that in September, beginning in September, you can look for these twice monthly videos to be coming out on the first and the third Mondays of each month. So those are the days that I'm going to shoot to publish, which means that as I get into this video a little bit later, I am going to be talking about Kickstarters that are currently running. So I will be talking about Kickstarters that are ending up through the 7th of September, because I will be publishing another video on the 7th of September. And in that video, I'll talk about all the Kickstarters that are ending September 8th through, I guess it would be the 21st. And then on the 21st, there's a video that I'll post that'll be talking about Kickstarters ending on the 22nd through whatever the publication date will be on at the beginning of October. So just so that that's clear, that's how it's going to work. Okay, the second thing I'd like to talk about in this little beginning section here are the cleaning up of some of the categories that I'm talking about in my videos. So in the first video, I talked about games that had arrived and games that were arriving, that would be arriving next month. And I think especially now with what's happening with the pandemic and everything being delayed, a month to 6 months, even more months, I don't think it's going to really serve me or you if I'm talking about a game every month because it keeps getting delayed, the delivery of it keeps getting delayed. So I'm going to eliminate the category where I'm talking about games that are arriving, and instead I'm just going to talk about the games that arrived since the previous video. And it's just going to eliminate some of me talking about the same things over and over again. One of those games that I talked about last video is Loot of Lima, which was scheduled to arrive this month, and it didn't. So I may mention it briefly, but I'm not going to talk about it at length because I don't feel I need to repeat myself. And there are several other games in this video that got pushed for one reason or another. Either it didn't deliver when it was supposed to deliver, or it was a game that was supposed to launch on Kickstarter that got pushed back. So if I do make mention of any of those games, I'm not going to be talking about them again at length because I don't need to repeat myself or waste anyone's time, but I will mention it briefly and then move on to the next game that I have not talked about. Now, the one exception to me talking about games a second time are going to be in the played game sections. So, for instance, if I had a game arriving or I had a Kickstarter that I backed personally or was talking about backing, and I talked about the game at one time, and then I actually receive the game and play the game, when I talk about it in the played game section, I then will be talking about games that I may have talked about before. And the reason is that I've now played the game, so I have hopefully more to say than I did when it was a game that I was just looking at and making observations about. So once I actually play the game and have an experience with it and have more to say about it, I think it then becomes valuable for me to talk about that game again. So for instance, in this video, there are two games, the only two games that I've played since the last video, which are Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion, and Fort. And those are games that I talked about in the previous video. But I will be talking about those games again because those are games that I have now played and I would like to share my thoughts with you about them in more detail. Also, I'd like to talk to you for a moment about kind of what's planned for upcoming videos. So in my first video, the video that came out in July, I mentioned 5 types of videos that I was going to be making. One was the monthly update, which is what you're watching. One was a teach, so I'll be doing a series of teach videos. One was a series of playthroughs specific to campaign games, kind of adventure-y type games, because those are things that I think will lend themselves well to successive watching. So, for instance, I could play something like The Seventh Continent, and if people like it and they're getting something from it, I can kind of play through a campaign. Or, other games I could do that with would be something like Mansions of Madness or Descent, or, there's a million games like that. Gloomhaven is another one, Tainted Grail, anything that kind of has a campaign. So that's the third type of video, these kind of campaign playthrough videos. The fourth is an impressions video, which I'm distinguishing a little bit from a review because I'm not going to just give a score. Instead, I'm going to be talking about a game and what's good about it, what's bad about it, whether I like it, but also who I think will like the game. And, if it's a game that falls in a genre that you really like, you may not need it to be as good as a game that falls in, let's say, if I don't really like that genre. So for me, and this is true, I'm not a huge fan of party games and social deduction games. And the general reason for that is I feel that the game itself doesn't really matter that much as to whether you're going to have a good experience. It's that the experience depends much more on your group. So I think with those games in general, the enjoyment of that game depends much more on the people playing it than the game itself. So for me, there's never a real reason to seek out those games because I don't feel that the games themselves really they're that kind of make it or break it as an experience for me. Now that said, all that means is that a social deduction game or a party game has to be really, really good. So if I do happen to recommend something like that, hopefully you'll know it's really, really good, that it's the cream of the crop. Now, as with any reviewer, there are caveats, right? And hopefully the more you watch my videos, you'll learn what I like and what I don't like. And so you'll say, oh, Brian doesn't like that game, but he doesn't really like that kind of game anyway. And so it's still safe for you to like the game if it's a genre that you like and designers that you like. So hopefully as I make my preferences clear, you'll know how to kind of move around those. I remember when I was growing up and I'd watch Siskel and Ebert reviewing movies, I didn't always agree with them. I didn't have to, but I would know like, oh, okay, Roger really doesn't like horror movies. I'm not saying that's true, but if that was the thing, I'd know like, oh, if it's a horror movie and Roger doesn't like it, that doesn't really mean anything, right? But I could take some of the things that he said and then apply it to my own feelings about content that I like. And I could make an educated guess of like whether I'd like it or not. And so hopefully that's something that you'll be able to do with me and that you can do with any board game reviewer or personality. Yeah. So I also do feel the need to say that, no, I don't feel the need to say that. Never mind. I'm moving on. So that's the fourth kind of video is an impressions video, which, as I said, is going to be a little different from a review. And then the fifth kind of video is going to be more than an unboxing, but not a teach. And I've already recorded one of these, and by the time you're seeing this, it should be posted. And it's going to be or it is for Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. And I'm going to call the series Inside the Box. And my idea for that series, that group of videos, is for you to be able to see something about a game that you might pick up at a store, and you're looking at the box, you turn it over, you're looking at like the back of the box. Sometimes they have the components, kind of laid out, or the game board all laid out for you, and you're looking at that, and you're thinking like, ah, geez, this looks really neat. But I still don't know. I still don't know if this game is for me, and I'd really like to be able to just open this box and kind of start pulling some stuff out and looking at it to see if this is something that I want or not. So that's what I'm looking for these series of videos to fulfill. I'm not going to teach you the whole game, but I am going to open up the box and do more than an unboxing. I'm going to, show you the components and kind of how they work on the board and how everything looks together. And so you can kind of see some stuff in action, get an idea of what the components look like, how they work together, and hopefully that'll give you a better idea of whether the game is something you want to buy, if it's something that you're on the fence about. So those are the 5 types of videos that I'm looking to make. Now, I've had the last month to, kind of deal with pandemic stuff and personal stuff and, look at my own ability to produce videos. And what I've decided is I think for the foreseeable future, I'll be able to produce maybe 1 to 2 videos a week. So that's what I'm going to shoot for. And as I've already said, the monthly updates are going to be hitting the 1st and 3rd Mondays of the month. So that will be at least one of the videos getting produced the week that they come out. And there'll be 2 of those per month, right? So that'll leave up to 6 more slots for me to produce videos each month. So it'll be some combination of those other videos that I just mentioned. And I think I may try to do maybe 2 of the campaign playthroughs and alternate them with the monthly updates. So, each week you'll be getting 1 of those things alternating, which then will leave 4 slots for the 3 other types of videos, which are the impressions, the inside the box, and teaches. And so from there, I'll just kind of be looking and seeing what's really appealing to me, what I think people might want to see videos about, maybe what's hot on Board Game Geek, just because that'll give me an idea of what's popular, what people want to see videos about. So I'd also recommend that as I'm making these videos, the monthly update videos, for you to reply in the comments and tell me of the videos. Tell me of the games that are arriving that I'm going to be telling you. Well, I guess I'll tell you when they've arrived. So I'll be looking at you to tell me when I list a game that's arrived, if that's something you might want to have a review on or have a teach for, or possibly see a campaign playthrough of. So please let me know that in the comments, and that'll give me some idea of what you want to see moving forward. Okay, that done, to give you an idea of my plans for the channel and the videos, and hopefully through editing I'll be able to make that much more streamlined and coherent than what I just filmed. I think I will. I'm now going to move on and talk to you about 4 different types of games. So I'm going to talk to you about games I've played since the last video, which is just 2 games. I'm going to be talking to you about games that have arrived since the last video, which is 9 games. But of those 9 games, 4 of them I've talked about at length in the previous video. So 4 of those 9 games I'm just going to be sort of mentioning. And then the other 5 I'll be talking about a little bit more. Then I'll be talking about the Kickstarters that I didn't mention in the last video. And that section is going to be this video only. That section is going to have 8 games listed. And one of those games I'm going to be talking about at length more than the others. I sort of feel the need to, jump back and kind of mention these good looking and seemingly solid playing games that I omitted on my July video. But I don't want to spend too much time with them. And there are some of them that are still available for a late pledge that you can jump in, after the fact and pledge now. And I will mention as I'm talking about them which games those are. So I think there's 5 games that you can late pledge. There'll be a 6th game that I want to talk about at greater length, and then there'll be 2 games that I still want to mention, but you can't. Unfortunately, you can't pledge them. And then in the future, that category of games that I'll be talking about will not exist anymore. Instead of that, I will be talking about games that I pledged. And that'll be a short section because I'm not going to back that many games. And then the final section of games I'm going to be talking to you about today, and there'll be 8 games in this section. These are the Kickstarters currently running that you can go out and back if you watch this video and they appeal to you. And that's kind of what I'm going to be targeting with this series of videos in the future. These games that you can go back. I think that's really kind of where I want to focus my energy, both on the Kickstarter columns I've been running, but also in these monthly updates. I want all of those things to make it very easy for you, the viewer, to see something you like and then go back it, hopefully with more knowledge about it and an idea of the risk that's involved. And so I want these videos, these monthly update videos, to be the sort of video equivalent of those columns, because I know not everybody's going to want to go and look at the columns. Some people like video content better. So this will be what this series of videos is primarily designed to do. But I will also continue to talk about games that I played and games that arrived and the few games that I backed. Sounds good? Okay. So our first category that I'll be talking about are the 2 games that I played. And the first of those games is Fort. Now, Fort is a redesign of a game by Grant Rodiak. Leader Games took Grant Rodiak's previous design, and then they got Kyle Farron on board, who's the artist behind Root and the upcoming Oath Kickstarter, also from Leader Games. And they had him take this previous design and apply it to a new world. And this world happens to be kids building forts and eating pizza and collecting toys. And Fort is a simple game. It's fairly light. It's a card game. It's got a little more going on than just cards because it does have player boards. It has some tokens. It's going to take up a little more table space than just a card game. But essentially, it's just a card game. And it's definitely I want to say it's a lighter game, but it's not super light. Let's call it medium light. And it's a game that's fairly easy to get to the table. Even though it does have those player boards, it still doesn't take up a lot of table space. Now, I should mention the components a little bit. It doesn't have that many components because, again, it's primarily a card game. But it does have dual layered player boards, and I think they're very well designed. They're thick, they're chunky, and they have space, where you can put in toys or pizza that you're collecting, and they'll slide into the slots. There's also on the left side of the player board, there's a place where you can slide some cards in, and there's kind of like a little notch out of the board, so it shows the icon of those cards, and that allows you to take additional actions as you play the game. And then there's also a little track on the bottom where, as you increase your fort level, because you're building sofa forts, you move your tracker over, from slot to slot as you're improving the value of your fort. I'm about to play Fort later today, actually, but I have played a few games already in various states. Not all of them were completed, but enough to know that I do really like the game. As I said, I'm going to kind of veer away from giving things number grades, especially when I'm just talking about my playing it. But I do genuinely like the game. As a gamer, my interest lies with really heavy Euros. Like I like games that have a lot going on and multiple systems to manage. And a lot of the fun and joy for me in gaming is kind of like managing or multi-managing like all these systems concurrently. I like the chunkiness of that. And I also like campaign games. I like when you make choices in a game and then it has an impact sometimes beyond that game. So when you're doing something and you're following a story, but you're also maybe building a character or building up an engine that extends over the course of the campaign. So those are the games that I like. And my problem with really light games is that I feel it often doesn't really offer players impactful choices. I'm not generally a fan of really light games where it feels like the game is on rails and it kind of plays itself, or where there's not really very much required of you as a player. Beer and pretzels games are generally not my forte, although I do like them occasionally. But I want to be able to do things that kind of have more impact. So when I'm looking for lighter games, I'm looking for games that still offer meaningful choices. And Fort, so far from my plays of it, does offer that. Like, you are making choices and you're doing things that do have impact and give you agency, where you feel like there is a result from the things you're doing. The game isn't just kind of evolving by itself while you sit there watching it. And I played Fort a few times with my fiance. There is a little bit of a barrier to entry as you're learning the game, because there's some card iconography that can be a little confusing for a first-time player, but they do give you these kind of player cards, so you can always look at that when you're still learning the game to see what all of the symbols mean. Other than that, it's a really fun, neat game. I mean, the theme is really enticing to me, and the theme of kids eating pizza and playing with toys and collecting the stuff and building forts. It's a fun theme just by design. And Kyle Farron's art, which I think I read someone comparing it to Charles Schultz, which I'm not sure Peanuts. I'm not sure I'd really make that comparison, but I see where it came from. And he does also capture that kind of, excitement and wistfulness and creativity and imagination of young kids kind of being in their own world and creating. So it's a light game. It's a fairly easy game to get to the table, and it's just, in my opinion, full of a lot of fun and joy. So I would very much recommend Fort to anyone who wants that kind of game. A lighter game that still gives you meaningful choices and gives you agency and allows your choices to have impact. I'd probably label it as a medium light game. Now, the other thing is Kyle Farron and Leader Games, who produced Fort, are both behind Root and the upcoming Oath. And so if you're looking at all three of these games, it's the same artist. So you're going to see a huge, they all look of a piece. And Oath and Root are both more complicated games. There are some similarities in the way that Root plays, but Root is also kind of like a Vast, which is another Leader Games series. And both Vast and Root have asymmetric player powers to a large degree, to the point where whenever you're playing that game, you need to learn your player abilities as a new game. Like, you're not just learning how a faction works. Each faction has its own set of mechanics, deep mechanics. And so it seems to me that Fort would be a great way to sort of introduce someone to Root and Oath, because they're going to see the same kind of art. They're going to use some of the same mechanics, but in a much simpler way. And then they'll be able to eventually, if they want to, go on to Root and kind of have a basic understanding how a lot of it works. But with Root, they'll then have, they'll then go and be able to learn like all these mechanics for all these different factions. In Fort, you don't have to deal with that. So it's kind of like a very basic version of Root in some ways. Similar art, some similar mechanics in the card play, but without all of the, different mechanics for every faction and each player. Which brings us to Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion. Now, I've owned Gloomhaven for quite some time. My fiance gave it to me as a Christmas present, I think, a year or two ago. But we didn't get to play it right away for some personal reasons that I probably don't need to go into in this video. So it's kind of sat on a shelf. And we've been waiting to kind of get to it and crack the sucker open. And part of that is because I knew that it had like a lot of mechanics thrust on the players right at the beginning. Everyone who's played Gloomhaven, OG Gloomhaven, and everyone that I've seen talk about it online, they seem to all have the same story, which is that they went into the game and there were just so many mechanics thrust at them, right from the get-go, that they weren't able to kind of deal with all of them at the beginning while they were kind of like learning this game. And specifically, they also seem to say that there is one mechanic where you can discard a card from the scenario to eliminate all of the damage from one source. So if you're getting, if you just take a huge hit for a number of health that's a very large percentage of your max health, it could almost one-shot you, right? And there are some things that could one-shot you. But there's this mechanic where you can discard one card, and there's a difference in Gloomhaven between discarding to your discard pile or like losing the card, so it kind of goes out of the game. This would be losing the card. So you're sending the whole, you're not going to be able to use this card again for the whole scenario. But in a situation where you're getting hit with that much damage, it becomes a very good action, a very efficient action, and it may stop you from losing a scenario. So I was aware of that, and a lot of people who missed that in OG Gloomhaven. So that, and combined with the kind of complexity, kept me away from the game. Mainly because it was just something that my fiance wasn't kind of ready to learn yet. But when Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion came out, and I knew it was like a simpler version of the game, and they kind of parceled out the teaching over a tutorial scenario, a series of tutorial scenarios, 5 of them. That seemed a much easier kind of way to slowly get your feet wet in the game. And if you watch that other video that I now have up, you will see how over the course of those first 5 scenarios, they parcel out the information that they're teaching you. And I think it's great. I think it makes it very, very easy for anyone to learn. It kind of holds your hand. It never gives you too much information. So it's much easier to learn it, and to learn it without being confused, or to learn it in a way where, you play a scenario with some rules, you get a handle on those, and then the next scenario adds in more rules. So you're not going to sort of be in a situation of avalanching complexity of mechanics where it's just too much. Like, hopefully, and I think it works really well, where you get a certain set of mechanics and you kind of learn them and get comfortable with them, and then the next one adds in more. So it's a very well designed and efficient system of parceling out the mechanics. And as I've said before, I'm a huge sucker for campaign games, and my fiance is not hugely into competitive games, especially if they have Take That. So more and more I'm realizing that the games that are going to connect with her better are cooperative games. And she likes stories as well, so she likes campaign games as well. So Gloomhaven has been a huge hit for us because of the way it kind of like slowly taught the game, but also because we're, following an adventure and following a story. Now, for old Gloomhaven fans, I guess you should know that there are far less scenarios in Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, but there are also far less opportunities for you to go off on side quests. So there are some side quests. Some of them are character specific. Some of them are made by choices. But there are only 25 scenarios in the entire game. And of those 25 scenarios in a typical campaign, I think you're going to play about 17 or 18 of them. So you're still not going to see all of Jaws of the Lion. I think if you want to do that, you probably need to do a second campaign and go back and replay it. Now, we're playing it 2 players, and there are 4 characters that come in the game. So we've chosen 2 of the characters to play. I'm playing the Demolitionist, and she's playing the Void Warden? Yeah, the Void Warden. So we didn't touch Hatchet, or there's a tanky character. I can't remember his class. I think it's called like a blood tank or something. So when we finish this campaign, we may go back and play those other 2 characters. And when we do that, we would then be able to play the scenarios that we specifically need those characters to play. And also if there are any times where we've kind of had to make a choice, which has led us to one scenario but locked us out of another one, we'll just go the other way. I may also instead do that 2-player follow-up campaign with another friend of mine who I don't think is going to get Jaws of the Lion but would like to play it. And so, that way I would get to see the other part of the game and experience the other characters with him. And the reason I may do that is, life is short. We only have so much time. And I do have a lot of other campaign games, including the original Gloomhaven, and I've backed Frosthaven. And so I think my fiance might want to move on to those, or move on to other campaign games like Tainted Grail, rather than kind of like, spending 25 scenarios. Well, it would be 17 or 18, wouldn't it? 17 or 18 scenarios replaying much of what she played before. Because I don't know if she's going to have quite the amount of excitement to replay some scenarios with different characters. I think maybe she'd just rather play, original Gloomhaven and experience all of that. The other thing that people who've played the original Gloomhaven should know about Jaws of the Lion is that it doesn't use tiles, which means that's much easier to tear down and set up. Instead, it uses book pages. And from what I've seen, people are pretty much universally praising the book pages because they do give you everything that they need to give you, and they also make setup and tear down much quicker. There is one problem with those pages, which is that they're bound so tightly together, and I think you're probably gonna be able to see this in that other video that I made, but they're bound so tightly together that as you're turning the pages, the insides within the kind of spiral binder kind of catch on each other and bend, and they could rip if you're playing it a lot, with going from scenario to scenario. So I think they might have been better served by having a little more space in the binding so that you could turn the pages more freely and not have them kind of catching on each other. The problem with doing that is that then they wouldn't completely line up with each other, so you'd have like a little bit of a gap. And a lot of times the map that you're playing on is using both of these pages. And so the way it's designed right now, they're pretty flush. And so those, if there's hexes that kind of like span over both of those pages, they're going to line up really well. And you would compromise that from spacing them out more. But by spacing them out more, you'd also increase the strength of the books themselves. I think if you were to probably play the campaign multiple times, eventually those pages are going to tear. So I think maybe that they should have done that, and they should have just allowed this kind of gap between the hexes. And my advice would be, if they ever do a reprinting, is to maybe alter the way they do those books a little bit. Now, that said, that's a very minor quibble. My one other minor quibble with the game is that the two characters that we chose, the Demolitionist and the Voidwalker, don't play that well together at the very, very beginning. And the reason is that the Demolitionist has very, very low initiative cards, and the Voidwalker has very high initiative cards. So the Demolitionist is always going first, almost always. You'd have to kind of be very lucky or unlucky for the Voidwalker to end up going first in order, at least in the very beginning, which means that the Demolitionist is always going first. So what happened in our first few scenarios that we played was I, as the Demolitionist, would get to go first. I would run up, I would kill an enemy or injure the enemy, often kill it. And then my fiance, who was playing the Voidwalker, would either have really nothing that she could do on her turn, or some of her abilities allowed to control enemies. So you could have one character attack another, or one enemy attack another enemy. But if I've just killed one enemy, it eliminates her ability to use those two enemies against each other. And it was a huge issue in the first 2 to 3 scenarios where she felt like she was really not doing much of anything. And luckily, as we kind of developed our characters and we got more cards and the scenarios introduced more mechanics and things became more complex and there was just kind of more to do overall, that kind of fixed itself. So it was a worry early on and it ended up being okay. But those are my really only 2 quibbles about Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. Other than that, I love it. I really, really love it. I'd be very excited if that was something that people wanted to, me to do as the narrative playthrough series. And I could still do it with those the Hatchet character and the Tank character if that's something that people wanted to see. And it definitely, it's just, I know from what I've seen other people talking about with Gloomhaven, people who want like a very well-told story are sometimes disappointed by Gloomhaven because it is very much more about the card play and the mechanics and the efficiency of that. And I'm good. I'm totally good with that. I love the mechanics. I love the way that they work. I love the way the cards play off each other. I love the way you kind of upgrade your hand as you play more and more and you get access to better cards. Some cards you can buy in terms of equipment, which gives you little ongoing abilities or abilities you can kind of re-trigger in scenarios multiple times. I like the way everything kind of levels up. And there is story there. It's not that there isn't story there. There is story there. It's just not the most compelling story you've ever seen in your life. But it doesn't need to be that, right? There is enough story to kind of keep me interested and keep it going. And I knew going in that it wasn't first and foremost about the story. I knew that the story was there, but it was first and foremost about the mechanics and the kind of interplay and the way you use efficiency with your actions and the puzzle of the game. So if those things are appealing to you, absolutely go get Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. It was originally a Target exclusive, but that's done now. You should be able to find it in your local game shop, online, anywhere. I'm sure Amazon has it, and sellers like Game Nerds, Card House, Cool Stuff Inc., Miniature Market, I'm sure they all have it as well. And it's about $50, which compared to, Gloomhaven and Frosthaven, it's about half of what you'd be, paying for those games. And I'm even talking about the retail version of those games. So if you're getting like the pimped out version of those games with all the like upgrades and stuff, it's going to be considerably more than $100. But so Jaws of the Lion is going to be definitely your most affordable choice. And there's still a lot of game in the box. And there's, replayability in it. And if you get to the point where you've played all 20, 17 to 18 scenarios multiple times over maybe 2 campaigns, and you love the game, maybe then you'll be like, you know what, it's worth it for me to drop $150 on Gloomhaven or Frosthaven. Now, if you do that, if you do go that route, you can take the characters from Jaws of the Lion and use them in those other games. You can also take characters from those other games and use them in Jaws of the Lion if you wanted to do so. I mean, if you were the person who was buying Gloomhaven or Frosthaven because you're kind of tired of Jaws of the Lion, I don't know if you'd want to import characters back into it, but you could. There are, I think, a few ways you kind of have to tweak things to be able to do that, but it can be done. So there is interplay between those games. There's not really much more for me to say other than I really love Gloomhaven, and I hope that other campaign games that I play, beat that in my estimation of that, but I like it so much that I don't anticipate that happening right away. I think a game would have to be really, really good to sort of outstrip Gloomhaven as a top campaign game. So both Fort and Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion are games that I would recommend, obviously for different audiences, although there's no reason that if someone has different tastes, they couldn't enjoy both games. Next up, I'm moving on to the games that arrived since the last video. And I've got 9 games to talk to you about in this section. And a few of them, as I mentioned, I've already talked about in the previous video, so I'm not going to talk about those in great depth. The first game is Concordia Venus. Concordia is one of those great medium weight games that offers very impactful choices. It allows you to pursue different strategies, but also if certain things aren't working out the way it's going, you can kind of like change gears and do something else. There are several mechanics in the game, so it allows you to do different things, whether that's getting resources or building things or kind of the way you're structuring your cards. And it's a great game. I think unless for some reason, because there's always going to be people who don't like a game, unless for some reason you find out you hate Concordia, I think Concordia is a game that probably everybody should own. It appeals to heavy gamers because there's still plenty to strategize about and plenty of kind of meaty, chunky choices to make. But it's not overwhelmingly complex. It's a game that you can still teach to a lighter gamer, and it's not going to make their brain burn or their head explode. It's kind of one of these middle of the road complexity games that I think everybody, for the most part, can really grok and enjoy. Now, I had put off purchasing Concordia for a while just because I sort of got deep into backing Kickstarters, and it was kind of like, oh, Concordia's not going away. It's such a popular, good game. It's always going to be available. And I have one friend who owns it, so I knew that was available if I really wanted to play it. And then I noticed one day that they were selling the Venus version of Concordia on Game Nerds for a pretty steep discount on a daily deal. And so I just picked it up. And the one thing that you should know about the Venus version is there are two Venus versions, right? There's the Venus expansion, which just comes by itself. And so if you own regular Concordia, you can buy the Venus expansion, and then you can play with it. And what the Venus expansion does is it allows you to play Team Concordia, which from everything I've heard is amazingly cool, but it also really adds on to the length of the game. So it's something when you're playing, like if we want to play this game and we want to have 2 or 3 teams of 2 people, the game's going to be a fairly long game. So it's not going to be for every situation, but I've heard that it's fantastic. So the version that I bought was a version that everything comes together. So it was the base game with Concordia packaged with the Venus expansion. And that's just something that you should be aware of in case you ever go to buy it. Know what you're buying. So if you don't own Concordia and you're buying just the Venus expansion, you need to look at it because you won't be getting the Concordia base game. You'll just be getting the expansion, which is not playable unless you have the base game. But you can get this version that I bought, which was super affordable because it was like a huge discount, and I was getting the base game and the Venus expansion all baked together. And so again, if you own the Concordia expansion, you want to make sure you're not buying that, because you're going to be buying something that you already have half of, right? You'd be buying the second base game again. So don't do that. just know that there are two versions out there, and you have to take a look and then buy accordingly. But I'm really happy to have this game. I'm going to be really excited to introduce this game to my fiance when we get there, because as I've said, I think it's just a great game that appeals to everybody. In the vein of like maybe a Lords of Waterdeep or a Power Grid. I think Pulsar 2849 is also kind of like in that sweet spot. Raiders of the North Seas, kind of in that sweet spot. But just there's some of these great midweight games that kind of work well for everybody. And I think those are games that are really good to have in any collection because they're so versatile. And, you know, for me as like a heavy Euro gamer, I can still pull that game out and get pretty much what I want from a heavy Euro game, but not have it be brain-burny heavy. The second game in this category is Eschaton, which I'm not going to talk at length about because I talked about it in my previous video when it was arriving, and it arrived. It's here, and I'm excited for it. It's kind of like Tyrants of the Underdark. It pairs deck building with area control. It's a little more thematic than Tyrants of the Underdark because everything is kind of black and white art, which could be very attractive to some people, could put other people off. And it also makes, there are kind of color cubes in it, or if you have I have the Cultist Meeple expansion, which just gives you like little worker cultists that replace your cubes, but they're still colored. And on this black and white board and surrounded by these black and white cards, it makes the colored components really pop. And I also got it with the Sigils of Ruin expansion. So I don't know if that's how quickly that'll get played, but I'm really excited about it. I think it looks really neat. Third up is an exit game. And I've been really curious about exit games. I have not yet played an exit game. I have not yet played an unlock game. I do know that, you know, if you don't know, let me just tell you, the exit games are one-time plays because as you play them, you will destroy things in the game, so you cannot play it again. The unlock games, however, you won't really be able to play it again, or you won't want to play it again. You won't want to play it again because you will learn the puzzles. So you kind of can't solve them a second time if you already know the solutions. But nothing in those unlock games is ruined. So after you've played it, you can pass it off to family or friends. You could donate it, maybe to a children's hospital. You could, you know, include it on a, well, maybe not on a toy drive if it's opened, right? I think toy drives like to have the games sealed. But you could donate it maybe to Goodwill or something, and people will be able to play it again. So exit is not the case. Exit, you play it once, it's done. And I know that makes my fiance a little nervous because she doesn't like to put a lot of, you know, garbage out. We have enough problems, I think, right now going on in the world with garbage and litter and the environment and stuff like that. So I don't know if I'll be buying more exit games. I think it'll depend on our experience with it. But I have always wanted to try them. And I got Exit the Abandoned Cabin, which is the first one published in the series. And it seemed like a great place to start, both because it was the first game and also I think an abandoned cabin theme is pretty universal. I really like Cabin in the Woods. And I also really like, you know, the Sam Raimi Evil Dead movies. So I like the abandoned cabin theme. So it seemed like it was going to be a good place for us to start. And I think that will probably be, I'll probably end up doing a review video on Exit the Abandoned Cabin. For both of those reasons. I think it would be good for me to get a review up of a game in the series. And I think it's good to be starting with the original one. So over the course of, you know, the next month, that's probably something you can be looking for. I probably also will be doing some kind of video about Fort, either a teach or a review. I have to decide which. But you can probably count on videos in the next month for both of those games. as well as a Teach of the Seventh Continent and a campaign playthrough of the Seventh Continent. I think in September, those are going to be the videos you'll be seeing. Those will be the 6 videos probably I'll be doing in September. 2 more games that have arrived, we've already talked about. Those are Fort and Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. So yeah, those arrived, and I don't feel the need to talk about them again. Also arrived, Irish Gauge. Now, Irish Gauge, I'm pretty excited about because I have found that I really like train games. I even like Ticket to Ride, which I sometimes, well, my fiance thinks that I thumb my nose at intro games a little bit, which I don't, but she thinks that I do, which I don't. But I do even like the Ticket to Ride games. I think I just like train games. And I do own both Railways of the World and Age of Steam. Age of Steam is a little bit more complex than Railways of the World, but I really like both of those games. And so now I've got Irish Gauge, which is another train game. They put out this package of games every year at Essen, and in 2014, one of those games was the Winsome Games version of Irish Gauge. But when they're doing this, that's not really going out to the mass market, right? I mean, it's kind of very much earmarked for Essen. So Capstone came and did a new version of Irish Gauge. I think it was 2019. Yeah, it's going to be the first in a new series for them. And the second one's already come out. It's called Ride the Rails. And I think I'll probably have to get that one as well because it looks like a great series. So I'm interested in that. And at some point, maybe I'll have to do a video kind of comparing that series of games along with Railways to the World and Age of Steam, because all 3 of those train series so far in my experience are fantastic, but not everybody needs to buy 3 different series of train games. And I think with both Railways and Age of Steam, the great thing about those games is you're kind of buying a base system, and then you can buy additional maps and add them on. Whereas with the Capstone series, each game is going to kind of be its own thing, its own standalone game. The next arrival in this series isn't a standalone game. It's the Captain America pack for Marvel Champions. And I really haven't played Marvel Champions yet. I kind of goofed around with the intro scenario. But right now I'm in the process of accumulating some stuff from Marvel Champions. I got the folded space insert, which if you're looking for affordable, kind of inserts and sorting devices for your games, folded space may be the cheapest, best one out there. It really kind of depends on the insert, so you kind of have to take a look at them. I have ordered certain inserts from folded space that I felt they were just using kind of like a standard that they had, and it didn't really feel super applicable to that game. But some of them are really, really well designed. And if you're not wanting to spend all the money on something like Broken Token or some of the really expensive ones, folded space will get you there. It'll get you where you need to be, and it'll do a good job of it for a much more affordable price. So I have the insert from folded space for Marvel Champions. I'm also kind of in the process of getting the different packs. And I think the only one that I have left right now that's actually published is the Black Widow pack. And that's kind of on a delayed delivery from, I think, from Card House. I don't think I'm going to be getting it until October. So I may wait until that comes before I sort of dive deep into Marvel Champions. But I do know they've already announced a whole bunch of things for the upcoming quarter. There are several more character packs and several more scenario packs. So I need to figure out if I want to buy those, because it's this ever-expanding thing, which seems pretty good. But before I keep putting money into it, I need to make a decision here. So it's not a full game that came, it's just the Captain America pack. But I'm excited for Marvel Champions. Also acquired this month is Quacks of Quedlinburg and the expansion, the Herb Witches expansion. Now, I've played Quacks of Quedlinburg before, and I specifically bought it for my fiance because I thought it is something that would appeal to her. And from my experience, I think two of the best bag builders out there are Orléans and Quacks. Now, Orléans is more of a heavier Euro, and well, first let me explain. So bag building is something where you've got resources that you put into a bag, and then every turn you're pulling resources out of this bag, and hopefully you're able to use them. It's kind of like a deck builder, but instead of drawing cards every turn or every round, you're going to be drawing tokens. Now, in the case of Orléans, they are workers, and Orléans is a very heavy Euro version of a bag builder, and there's very little luck involved. So depending on what you draw, you may have more powerful turns than if you'd drawn something else, but it's very much in the strategy and the tactics of how you use what you've got. There's very little luck involved, right? Whereas Quacks has quite a bit of luck involved. So they're both bag builders. They're both, I feel, at the top of their genre, but they're kind of doing different things. So Orléans is the no luck heavy Euro bag builder, and Quacks is the much lighter bag builder that also incorporates a pretty good amount of luck. There are things that you could draw out of your bag that are very bad for you. And there's a catch-up mechanic involved, which I'm not sure. Catch-up mechanics I'm always a little suspect about, because I feel like, why are the people who have played well being penalized? And if they work really, if they do a very good job of catching you up, it also can eliminate your choices. Like, what difference does it make what I do if someone's just going to get pushed to catch up with me anyway? Now, I haven't played Quacks a lot. I've played it, I think, once or twice. So as I play it with my fiance, I'll have to decide how balanced or unbalanced that is. If she ends up not liking sort of like the randomness or the take that, or the way negativity can afflict the player, I may end up eventually selling Quacks. But it's such a fun game, and it's got really pretty kind of components, and I like the design element, and the way that the mechanics are designed. I think is really fun, and I think it's vibrant and colorful, and I think it's a joyful experience playing Quacks. It all really kind of depends what your experience and feeling is about take that coming back to bite you on the butt, as well as randomness that can sometimes work against you and penalize you. If you're not hanging on every negative thing and it doesn't bother you, you're going to have a lot of fun with Quacks. If it's something where you need everything that happens in a game to be either under your control or at your own expense because you did something, you made a mistake, and now you're suffering the negative effects of that, and you're okay with that because it was only because of a mistake you made, Quacks probably will not be the game for you, because bad things will happen to you in Quacks that you that you don't deserve, but also that you didn't trigger to happen in action. So yeah, it's a lighter bag builder. It's a lot of fun, but you have to be okay with some of the randomness if you're going to really enjoy the game. Now, the last arrival this month, I did talk about previously in the July video, and that is Thunderstone Quest New Horizons. I didn't say that much about it then. I won't say that much about it now, because Thunderstone Quest New Horizons is essentially just more stuff. It's a few more scenarios, it's a few more cards and variability, but it's not a huge expansion. Thunderstone Quest originally had a ginormous base game, and then they later did a follow-up with a ginormous expansion. And both of those two things were just chock full of gameplay, so much stuff going on, enormous boxes. So New Horizons was just a much smaller update. And my fiance and I have both played Thunderstone Quest before. We both really, really enjoy it. I like its take on deck building. It takes what began with things like Dominion and Ascension, but then it adds all this other stuff into it. It adds kind of like components, not components, resources. It adds a resource system for some things. It adds like a health point and a wound system. It adds more variability in the way that you can get cards. There's a system for how you kind of kill enemies going down into a dungeon, and that kind of works off of light, which is another resource. So I like the kind of multiple systems that it has and the way they kind of like counterbalance with each other. And for me, that game and Aeon's End, those are my two deck builders. And I think Ascension and Dominion, I both like them in general, but I think that, you know, they were there first. Those were the two games that really kind of defined the genre of deck building, but there have been improvements since then. And for my money, for pure deck builders, Thunderstone Quest, Aeon's End, those are the way to go. If you're looking for other games that use deck building in them, but also have kind of other stuff going on, some great games there are Great Western Trail, Eschaton, or Tyrants of the Underdark, and what am I leaving out? Oh, the Clank series. So those are all games that have deck building in them where it's not the only thing happening. But Aeon's End and Thunderstone Quest are still very, like, they do have other things happening, but they're still very much deck builders. That is what they're all about. And as I said, they've very much kind of like refined what deck building is and how it can kind of function, in my opinion, from Dominion and Ascension. Okay, that brings us to the Kickstarter catch-up section. So this is where I'm going to be talking about a few games that I didn't include when I did my July video. The first of those games is Daimyo Rebirth of an Empire, and it's a dice placement game. So a lot of it is figuring out how you're going to use your dice and using that to, you know, move guys around on the board, get resources, and much of the game is centered around the player boards, which are very, there's a lot going on the player boards. There are a lot of mechanical systems on the player boards. So it's less a dudes on a map game in the sense that, you know, you're going out and having combat. Like, this isn't Rising Sun. This isn't, you know, Clash of Cultures or even like Lords of Hellas. This is sort of like a Euro game that is using dudes on a map and dice placement. So it's much more about the puzzle of the game and the kind of management of all these different mechanics and systems, which is my sweet spot. That's what I like. So I personally didn't back Daimyo. I am regretting it a little bit in my mind, but you can't back everything, right? You have to make choices. But it's a game that I'm really looking forward to playing at some point. And maybe if it comes back on Kickstarter, if it does really well, it's something that I'll back in the future. Next up is Dollars to Donuts, which is by the design team behind Point Salad, which a lot of people may have heard of, and Truffle Shuffle. So it seems like they're pursuing these kind of like food-themed set collection and hand management games. They also designed a game that looked really neat to me that I wanted to back but didn't back. Again, can't back everything. That was called Public Market, which had to do with fishing, and one of the artists on it was the artist from Wingspan. And so that made me aware of this design team, just the existence of Point Salad, but also how much I like the look of Public Market. So Dollars to Donuts is another food-themed kind of tile placement, hand management set collection game. It's themed around donuts, obviously. And it looks really neat the way you kind of like purchase and draft these donut tiles, and then you score based on kind of how you place them together. It's definitely a lighter game. You know, it's a tile placement game as well, kind of like a, you know, Patchwork or a Baron Park or a game like that. But I think between the scoring and the mechanics and the tile placement, and then knowing that the design team's pretty good. This is a game that definitely I was aware of, and I think a lot of people would like to own. It's also a lighter game, and it's cheaper on Kickstarter. It's not a $100 plus, pledge your bank account Kickstarter. It's a good little medium light game that you can pick up on Kickstarter for a very reasonable price tag. And that is, they are having late pledges for Dollars to Donuts. So Dollars to Donuts is one of those games that I mentioned that you can, if you hear me talking about it, and you like it, even though the campaign has finished, you could go over to Kickstarter and you could late pledge it. There are a few of these games I'm going to be talking about in this category, and they have different ways of signifying this on the Kickstarter page. Some of them call it a pre-order, some of them call it late pledge, but they all kind of amount to the same thing, which is that you are able to still order the game. Now, you may pay a little bit more than if you pledged during the campaign, and that's just something that people backstarting Kickstarter should be aware of. I mean, that's the reason to pledge them during the campaign. So some of these campaigns may allow you to, late pledge, opt in now at the same rate that you could back it for during the campaign. Some of them may be a little bit more expensive. If it's a game that you still like, I would still recommend doing it. But just know for the future that to stay more on top of that. And these videos will help you do that, because this situation will not happen again. From now on, whenever I'm talking about Kickstarter games, they will be games that are currently running. So if you come back and subscribe and keep watching these videos, I will keep you abreast of that, so that you will always, you always be hearing about games that are currently on offer from Kickstarter. So the other thing I should make mention of a little bit, though, is some people want to support a publisher on Kickstarter because they love the publisher. For instance, I pre-ordered Fort from Leader Games because I like Leader Games and I wanted to support them. But sometimes those games are actually going to be cheaper if you wait for them to hit, one of the online retailers or your local game shop. And so in that case, you just need to be aware when you're backing something like, is this what is being offered in the Kickstarter version versus retail? Because sometimes there is no difference. So if you want that game and you want to get it as cheaply as possible, often you can wait for that game to hit retail. Sometimes, like a CMON game like Massive Darkness, there are going to be so many extras baked into the Kickstarter version that you are going to get almost twice the gameplay or the components than you would from a retail version. And oftentimes, those additional things aren't even available at retail. So if you want those things, you need to back the Kickstarter. So that's just something to be aware of, right? Is this a good value for me? Is this something that is going to be identical at retail that I can get for cheaper? Or is this something that, like, if I want all of this extra stuff, I probably need to back the Kickstarter? Generally, with lighter games like Dollars to Donuts, you can get everything at retail. Not always. Sometimes they have little mini expansions or some promos, but it's just something to be aware of. So I'm sitting here and I'm telling you, yes, you can still go back this and you can late pledge it. I just want you to be aware that A, you may be paying a few dollars more depending on the Kickstarter, and B, there may be a few things that you're not getting if you'd pledged during the Kickstarter. So just take a look at it and, find out what that is for the specific game you're looking at and if that's acceptable for you. The next game in this category is Not Alone Sanctuary, and this also has a late pledge available. Now, Not Alone Sanctuary is a one versus many game. It's also a deduction game, and in that sense, it's not unlike Whitechapel, Letters to Whitechapel. or it's been rethemed a couple times, Letters to Whitechapel. There's also Fury of Dracula. They're essentially the same game where players are hunting Dracula, and it's a one versus many game. You know, Dracula's trying to keep away from them, or Jack the Ripper, depending on which game. And all of the players are trying to figure out his location. In Not Alone, there's a monster that one character is playing, and that monster is trying to hunt all of the other characters while the characters are trying to find the monster. So that's the base game of Not Alone. And there was a recent Kickstarter for Not Alone Sanctuary, which is an expansion. As is often the case with expansion Kickstarters, usually you can also buy the base game through those Kickstarters. Not always, but usually. And with Not Alone, I believe that was the case. So the expansion, Sanctuary, adds a few things, a few new mechanics, a few things in to the base game. One of them is our sanctuaries, where the players who are being hunted can retreat to. It's a safe space. I think it offers them certain rewards, and those rewards may get more powerful the more times you go to a sanctuary, but it also becomes more difficult to go to a sanctuary. Sanctuary, the game, expansion, also adds in the ability for the creature to mutate and change. So it's offering some new things to the base game. It's also offering some new mechanics, and it's an opportunity to get the base game. And I should tell you that Not Alone is a guessing game, a bluffing game, a hand management game, and it has a little bit of deck building in it. So you're using the hand management, your cards, and the deck building and stuff to try to catch this monster before he kills all of the human players. Now, this is the game that in future versions of this section, this will be the game that I'm talking about, this is a game that I actually did back. So this is both a game that I personally backed, and it's a game that I didn't talk about in my upcoming, section in July. But it's a game that I like, and I wanted to make you aware of. Unfortunately, they do not have late pledges for this one. And I believe that this is the final expansion for this game. So if you want it, you may need to do a little investigation on your own to see if you can get this. But I think you can get all of this stuff for this game in retail. There may be a few promos you might have to get through their website if you wanted to get all the promos. But for the most part, I think you can get everything in retail. The game is Petrichor, the Collector's Edition and Cows expansion. Now, Petrichor I find fascinating as a game. It's an abstract, sort of. It's got very colorful pieces, and you are essentially doing two things in the game. You have these little clouds that kind of float around a modular game board of tiles, and the clouds contain water droplets. And you have cards, and you're playing the cards to take an action on your turn that relates to the tiles and the water droplets, and then you are also voting. So it's got two different kind of area control. One is in the tiles and the water droplets, and one is in the voting. And it's very, very much a puzzle. It's a puzzle of a game, because all of the tiles are different plants, and you have these clouds that have water droplets that are moving around the tiles. So there's 4 different kinds of cards, and the cards are based on different types of weather and kind of seasonal things. So there's like sunshine, wind, rain, something else. Not sure what the 4th one is off the top of my head. I'm blanking on it. But you use these cards to do things like move the clouds around, add water droplets to add water droplets to clouds. And if clouds get too many water droplets in them, they'll become thunderclouds, and then eventually they'll just drop all of their water on the tiles below. Some of the cards you can use to move around water droplets that have fallen onto the tiles. And all of these things allow you to get water on the plants. And the plants all score differently. they're going to score based on area majority. So the water droplets that are being kind of distributed are different for every player's color. So once those droplets finally go onto the tiles and get moved around, and then the different plant and flower tiles score, it's going to be on kind of an area majority thing. But it's not always whoever has the most droplets gets the most points. Sometimes a plant may score whoever has the second or third most amount of droplets gets the most points. Typically, the plants also need to have sprouted and be growing, which is something else that happens in order for them to score. So it is very much a puzzle, because you're not just trying to get the most, you're trying to figure out, oh, how do I get the third most water drops on that tile to score it? And you're constantly kind of adjusting what you're doing based on what other players are doing and where they've put their water droplets. Meanwhile, you've got this whole voting mechanism that happens, and that scores points as well. And I really like the interplay of it. The components are really, really pretty. The board game's pretty as well. Everything's very, very well designed. And I just like this theme that you don't see very often, which is this nature theme. And it's, based on clouds and water and plants growing. And there's kind of just some very interesting little ingenious things, like when you make a cloud into a water cloud, if it gets a certain amount of water on it, you take a little lightning bolt and you put it on the side of the cloud, and the clouds even have a little slot where the lightning bolt goes. So okay, this cloud has become a thundercloud. And there's just neat things like that. They're just so well designed that I find very, very appealing. Now, the collector's edition is giving... the collector's edition provides some game trays, which help sort all of the contents, because there have been 2 previous expansions. There's been a honeybee expansion and a flowers expansion. So the collector's edition will give you a box that fits everything. It'll also give you a game tray system that fits everything and sorts everything. And there are also game tray versions of the clouds. So instead of the little cardboard box clouds players have been using previously, they'll now have these kind of molded plastic clouds. I think they're even on a little stand, so they'll float above the tiles as you move around, and it looks pretty cool. In addition to that collector's edition, there's also a third smaller expansion, the first 2 being flowers and honeybee, and this one is cows. And so cows is going to introduce a whole new set of mechanics, just as each of the other 2 smaller expansions did. And it has to do with like putting cows on the tiles and methane. It works in new mechanics and new ways of scoring based on the cows and the methane. So everything about Petrichor I find really neat. I like the puzzle of it. I like the design of it. I like the theme of it. And I thought, I would like the game tray system in the collector's edition, and I want the newest expansion. And it's also designed by David Churko, I think is how you pronounce his name, who also designed And Then We Held Hands, which is a very much smaller game that I own that my fiance really likes. It's kind of like it's a cooperative game. Shadow Kings of Valeria is another game I wanted to mention. And this one also has late pledge available. Now, if you play a lot of board games, you've probably heard of the Valeria series. It's been around for a while. There are 7 or 8 different games in the series. All of the art is by the Miko, who also does the art for, the Raiders of the North Sea, those of the North Sea games, and the of the West Kingdom games, Paladins, Architects. And I love his art personally. I think he's got fantastic art. So if you've seen the Valeria games, they all have his art. So they all tie together in look. Shadow Kingdoms of Valeria is, again, mechanically a little different. Every one of the Valeria games has different mechanics to it. And this one, there are these different shrines on the board, and every turn you are visiting a different shrine. And when you do something in the shrines, there's like a grid of, I think it's 9 squares on the campaign board. And if you do something that, if you do like the top left action and you get a reward for that, you're going to mark it. And then later on, if you do, let's say the middle left one, there's bonuses between all of the rewards on this grid. So as you're, kind of going to the shrines and taking actions and getting rewards, you're also planning on what to do based on the bonus rewards that you get when you do two things that are orthogonally adjacent to each other. And I like, again, the multiple systems of that. I like the way, you're doing things on the shrine board, but you're also being aware of this campaign board and trying to kind of like coordinate what you're doing so that you can maximize the efficiency of your actions. Spirits of the Forest, Moonlight, is another game that is available to late pledge. And Spirits of the Forest is a very, very easy light game. There's a kind of tableau of tiles, and you're going to be choosing tiles on your turn from one side of the tableau or the other, or both. In some cases, you can take two tiles. And it's just a set collection game, really. But it's very, very, very pretty. And if you kind of go and get the deluxe version of the game, it's got these very kind of pretty sort of plastic molded eggs that you use, and they're gorgeous. So I don't think that was a game that I would necessarily back myself, because I think it's a little light for me. But if you like lighter games, it's one of the prettiest ones out there. It has fantastic components, and the gameplay, for what it is as a lighter game, people seem to love. So that is a game I think you probably want to be aware of. Also, from last month, and this one is closed as well, but it also does have late pledges available, is Tutankhamun. And this is a game from Reiner Knizia, or Knizia? I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Reiner Knizia. Let's go with that. And he's a huge, prolific designer. Tutankhamun had not had a new edition put out in quite some time. The old version is out of print. It's hard to find. So this is a very simple light game, but it's pretty. It comes with a box, which becomes a component in the gameplay. So you'll take the lid off the box. There's a sarcophagus that will stay in the box. And then the player score markers will sit on the edge of the box and kind of move around the edge of the box as you play. And you'll create this huge line of tiles. And then the gameplay is just each player moving down tiles, kind of like a time track, where you can move as far ahead as you want to get the tile that you want, but you can't go backwards. So you're kind of always making this decision of, do I get this tile that I don't want that much, but is a little valuable, and then I'll maybe get to go again and take another tile, or do I want to jump very far forward, get a tile that I specifically really, really want, and then maybe lose 2 or 3 turns in the process, as other players can then kind of take tiles that I've passed by. So that's the kind of central decision-making process there, and then based on the tiles that you get, there's kind of scoring that happens. The way the scoring works in Tutankhamun, I think all players start with a certain score based on player count. I think it's maybe 30 with the max player count, which may be 6. And then as you're doing things, your score goes down. So when a player hits 0, they trigger the end game and they would win. So it's kind of this contest to score points based on tiles you're taking. It's a simple game, it's a light game, but it still has impactful, meaningful choices. It's pretty, and it has some really good artists working on this version, Jackie Davis and Matt Paquette. Matt Paquette has worked on Tiny Towns, Mystic Vale, Thunderstone Quest, some really good-looking games, and Jackie Davis worked on Viticulture, which is a gorgeous-looking game, and Euphoria, and what else? Ex Libris, and one of the previous versions of Stockpile. But this is a Knizia game who is a, widely considered a great designer. It's a game that's long been out of print, and it has a new version with some really good looking art from 2 really good artists. Again, a little light for my personal tastes and my collection, but if this is in your wheelhouse, this is a game you probably don't want to overlook, and it is still available as a late pledge. The final game in this section just ended recently. Unfortunately, this one, in addition to Daimyo and Petrichor, it's not a game that you can go and late pledge. But I still feel like I should talk about it because it looks neat and it's pretty and I want to talk about it. And that is Vampire the Masquerade Rivals Expandable card game. Now, they've made like half a dozen Vampire the Masquerade games in the last 6 months to a year, so the names are getting very long and unwieldy. But what I can tell you about this one is that it's being put out by Renegade Game Studios, because not all the Vampire the Masquerade games are from publishers of, equal caliber. But Renegade is a publisher that I really like, and I think you should be able to have some trust in as a consumer. So I think you're very on safe footing in general buying Renegade Games products. And it's essentially like Magic the Gathering, but with vampires, or a Game of Thrones the card game, but with vampires. And the idea is that everybody is representing a different faction of vampires, and they're kind of all fighting for control of the city. And so they get cards, they get vampire cards, and they kind of, they put them out in tableaus, like in any of these card game fighters, like Magic or Game of Thrones, the card game. So you're kind of building this tableau to then fight the other clans. The interesting thing about Vampire is that if you're playing with more than 2 people, each person's going to get a rival, and it'll be randomized. So if I'm playing with 4 people, you might be my rival, but it's not a one-off, I mean, it could work out that way because you're choosing rivals based on random tokens. So it's possible you could have each other as rivals, and then the other 2 players could have them as rivals, but it also could be like, you're my rival, but this guy over here, he's your rival. So it could kind of, be randomized. And most of all, you're trying to take down your rival. Okay, so that's going to be randomized. That's one thing I like about it, though, is the way that it switches it up so that it's not always kind of a one-on-one thing, and there is some variability to who is each person's kind of greatest adversary. The other thing that's really kind of neat about Vampire, the Masquerade Rivals expandable card game, is that vampires can get hurt. When they get hurt, they don't necessarily die, so they don't go out of the game the way a card might get defeated in a different game. Instead, they may need to retreat toward their vampire haven, and they may need healing. And so then it becomes your job to supply them with blood in one way or another. And if they kind of heal up a certain amount to what is indicated on their card, they can then be brought back into the game. So I like that idea, and obviously it works really well with vampires. But I like that kind of like take on the genre. And the card art is just gorgeous. It's a really, really pretty looking game. So again, not necessarily my game. I did own a Game of Thrones, the card game, at one point, and sort of rejected it. I didn't really like the gameplay or feel like it was a game for me. I would be more inclined to play this one, to own this one, but I'm not going to jump out and back it or own it right now. But for the right person, I feel like if you're a fan of Magic, or you're a fan of Game of Thrones, the card game, or if you're a fan of vampires, I mean, this game looks really neat. It looks really great. And as I said, unfortunately, at this point, you're going to have to, I think, wait for it to hit retail. But if the game does really well, there may be future Kickstarters. You may be able to, jump on and get the base stuff and kind of more promo stuff and other expansions through a future Kickstarter. So that ends the section of Kickstarter kind of catch-up games in this video and future videos. So future videos won't have this section. Instead, it'll just be a very short section of the games that I personally backed. And as I said, right now, the only game that I backed in July was Petrichor Collector's Edition and Cows. And I'm really happy about that because, there are months where I backed 3 or 4 games. So the fact that I kept it to 1 game for July, I'm excited about. I also have so far kept it to 1 game for August. And in order to find out what that game is, you're just going to have to wait and come back to the next video when I talk about that on the early September monthly update. Okay, that brings us to the final section of this video, which is what should I back? And this is what I really want to concentrate on these videos moving forward, because I think that this is where I can kind of give you the most value for your time. So these are games that even when I've finished editing this and it gets posted, all of these games should still be at play on Kickstarter and live. So these are games that you can back. And I generally list games in the category that I'm talking about in alphabetical order, but for this section, I'm going to list them in the order of date. And I think that'll work best for you as an audience. So if you are liking these games, you can kind of write them down and you'll have them in order that their campaigns conclude, and you'll also have the dates. So you'll kind of know, all right, this is the first one to end. I want to be on top of this one. And the first game in this group is Massive Darkness 2 Hellscape. Now, this is a game that it's a CMON game. And these games are beasts of games, these CMON campaigns. They typically give you a base game pledge and a second pledge that has usually like a big expansion attached to it. And then that's it. Those are just the two pledge versions. And usually one's around $100 and the other one's around maybe 150. But over the course of these CMON campaigns, they then add on all of this optional content. So by the time you get to the end of it, if you want everything, you're looking at $300 to $500, which is super expensive. And that's something that most people don't want to, drop on one game. Miniature lovers tend to like these campaigns because the miniatures are good. And so they'll back the games, even if they don't want the games, just for the miniatures, because for the, whatever it is, $300, $400, $500, they're getting so many miniatures of such a high quality that it's worth it. And the other thing about these CMON games is all of this additional content that you can get, like half of it will never be available in retail. So it does, I think, play into FOMO a little bit. People, back these campaigns because they're afraid of not being able to get all this content if it goes to retail. These are just things to be aware of. So if you like Massive Darkness, if you want to back it and you want to back all of it, just know it's gonna hit you for a pretty penny, right? It's no small pledge. Also, we should talk a little bit about Massive Darkness in general. So the original Massive Darkness came out several years ago, and it took the kind of pretzel and beer format that CMON had made popular in their Zombicide games, and it added on dungeon crawling to it. So Zombicide are kind of known as these games that aren't particularly heavy games. Yes, there can be a bunch of mechanics in them, but they aren't really brain burnery, and they're games that you can play when you're eating pretzels and drinking beer and getting a little drunk, and the game is still not going to get away from you because it's not that difficult. And then they took their Massive Darkness brand and they added on dungeon crawling to that. So now, in addition to having that kind of like, oh, let's go out and kill a bunch of zombies and kind of like interact with these interesting mechanics, miniatures and card play and kind of balancing different resources and things, now you could play that, but you could also do it in a dungeon crawl format where you're upgrading your characters as you go and you're playing through a campaign. And as I've said before, I like campaign games. So Massive Darkness seems to be sort of the Zombicide game for me. Also, the original Massive Darkness got a lot of complaints for being not very well balanced. Now, if you've ever played certain video games, sometimes they can be very difficult in the beginning. And then as you kind of power up and level up, you can come back, to certain things later in the game and just kill everything because you become overpowered. And that became an issue with Massive Darkness based on what other players have said. Not in a good way either. Okay? I mean, some of that design is intentional for some games because they want you to, you need to still, even if you're just killing some household rats in the first scenario, they still need to present some kind of a challenge to you. And from things that I've read and heard from people that I know that own the game and have played the game, it was too hard in the beginning, like prevented you from wanting to play the game difficult. And then as the more you played Massive Darkness, you leveled up to the point where it became stupidly easy, like too stupidly easy. Stupidly easy to the point that it was not fun to play it. So that is something they've tried to correct in Massive Darkness 2. That's something that the players have wanted, and that's something that I think they knew that they needed to change. I don't really know the specifics of how they did that or how well they did that. I just know that it was something that they were trying to do. Yeah. So hopefully they've made that change and they've made it a smoother experience. Now, I really do want to back Massive Darkness too, because I don't have a game like this in my collection. What's stopping me is that I'm a completist. So if I get it, I don't want to buy everything. And the other thing is I do have a bunch of campaign style games already, like a lot. And I don't know if I need all this stuff. I'm also kind of running out of space. So do I want to spend all this money to get all this stuff and have it take up all this space if at the end of the day it's going to still be a mediocre experience because it's just like, even if they fix the gameplay a little bit, it may be a little bit on the mindless side, and that may be okay. That may be the game that you want. And certainly it looks exciting enough to me that I'm mentioning it here as a game I think you may want to back. But I think part of that is also kind of me communicating to you the positive and negatives of it. So by all means, if you like that kind of zombie-side gameplay with the dungeon crawling in it, you may just want to go out and back it. And if you want to not miss out on anything, that you can't get at retail, you may just want to back all of it. If you are comparing this to many other campaign games, some of which have a lot going on mechanically or story-wise, perhaps more than Massive Darkness, you may still even want to sit this one out. But not having a big CMON game and there being a lot attractive about this one to me, it's still one that I'm thinking about and trying to make a decision on. Next up, we have Western Legends Blood Money. A lot of people like Western Legends, and this one is, as with Massive Darkness 2, this campaign ends on August 25th. So I'm making a commitment to you to get this video out before the 25th, so that those two campaigns have not ended. There have been 2 previous expansions for Western Legends. No, I'm sorry, there's been 1, which was Anti-Up. So they're saying that this is kind of like the 3rd and final part of the trilogy, but that first part is the base game, Western Legends. So there was Western Legends, there was this expansion, Anti-Up, and now there's Blood Money. So this kind of concludes the Western Legends experience. I personally I played Western Legends. I didn't love it. It's trying to be kind of like a Old West Grand Theft Auto, the board game, or in that sense, I guess maybe a Red Dead Redemption, the board game. And it's very much a sandbox game, so it offers you lots of things to do. Some of it's pick up and deliver missions. You're allowed to be a bad guy or a good guy. If you're a bad guy, you want to commit crimes and raise your wanted level, but not get caught. If you're a lawman, you want to catch criminals. And there's different things you can do. There's gambling you can go and do. And the different expansions add on kind of more mechanics to the game. I didn't love it because I felt there just wasn't enough in the gameplay to me that I felt like I could make good, informed, impactful choices in kind of a Euro-y way. Like I wanted to be able to do what I was trying to do and not get messed with too much. And when I played the game, I had someone who was a lawman just kind of follow me around and gank me over and over and over and over and over and over and arrest me. it also got to the point where it didn't really serve me to be to kind of switch gears and become a lawman. But there were other criminals also playing the game, and some of the lawmen were just ignoring them and focusing purely on me. So it put me in this place when I was playing it where I didn't feel like I had any more good choices, and I was sort of being targeted by some of the other players, while other players were running away with the game because their actions were going sort of like uncontested. And so the game kind of felt very imbalanced to me. Now, I tell you all this as a caveat. I'm not trying to slam the game because I think the game does have a lot that it offers, and I know a lot of people who love the game. And so I want you to be aware that there is this third and final piece of the game, that third and final piece being a second expansion, and that is this blood money. And it adds on several things to the game. Just checking my notes for a moment. It adds on injury cards, which have kind of like longer deleterious status effects that are harder to remove than they were in the original game. It adds on something called a risk die, which if you roll it, could give you an advantage. It adds on things like deeds, which actually sounds pretty cool because you could buy some of the locations around town. It adds on a traveling trader, which sounds kind of neat. So the trader can kind of travel around the board, and you may miss them if you're not there quick enough to look into their wares. And it adds on something called a legendary story system. Now that doesn't make it into a legacy game, it just adds some narrative elements that allow you to sort of further customize your story and how you're scoring points. So it does sound neat, it does sound interesting. So Western Legends, Blood Money, it's good until 8.25. And if you're one of those people who likes the sandbox style game and you don't mind as much as I do as when a player can specifically target you and come after you and just lay on you, then check this out because a lot of people love this game. On 8/26, Lizard Wizard ends its campaign. Lizard Wizard is designed by Glen, who I think he's done a little bit with some train games, but specifically he is the designing genius behind Raccoon Tycoon. And Raccoon Tycoon, if you have not played it or you haven't seen it, it's a combination market game. So you're doing resource management, but you're doing that within a market environment where you're trying to sell high, buy low. And the things you do, you're trying to drive up the price of certain goods. And then when they're high, you want to sell all your goods. And when you sell a certain type of good, like for every good you sell, it's going to make the price come down. So you're trying to drive up the price of something and then sell it when it's high. And then if it gets really low, you could buy it if you need them for something. And then you're using those resources to do certain things. You're buying railroads, and all of the cards have very, very cute anthropomorphic art on them. So, a lot of cats and dogs, very, very cute. And it's a set collection game. So you've kind of got the trading aspect going, and then you've got the set collection thing with the railroads you're collecting and some buildings that you're building. And there are also kind of cards that you can acquire that give you ongoing powers. Now, Lizard Wizard it's not a retheming of the same game. It does have the same art, the same artist. So, it looks very similar. And that's a good thing because the art for Raccoon Tycoon is gorgeous. So the art for Lizard Wizard is gorgeous. And the mechanics are similar in the sense that I think if you played and liked Raccoon Tycoon, you're going to like Lizard Wizard, but it doesn't feel like it's the same game. I think you can own both. You also might feel like you don't need to own both, but I think you could own both and feel like you're getting different things out of them. So Lizard Wizard also has a market system and a resource management system kind of similar to that in Raccoon Tycoon, but instead of being things like wheat or building materials and stone and wood and those kinds of things, these are reagents for casting spells. And you are lizards who are wizards. So you're using these components that are based around reagents to acquire and spell cards and cast spells. So it's a similar game mechanically, but there's enough different that it feels different. And I like what's going on with the spells and the resources to, to activate the spells. And it just looks really cool. So it's got auction and bidding. It's got commodity speculation, hand management, push your luck, and set collection. Again, if you're very anti-push your luck, you should know that it's there to some degree. I don't feel like it's awful in my experiences with Raccoon Tycoon, but it can be there from time to time. But if you like Raccoon Tycoon, if you've played Raccoon Tycoon and you like it, maybe you don't own it and you're looking for another variation on that, or you're fine with a game that is somewhat similar but also different, like, check out this game, because it's a solid game. And I think Glen Drover is producing some gorgeous games now and very, very solidly designed games. And he's one of those, he's behind one of those companies that I think is going to continue over the next 5 or 10 years and really make a name for themselves as a premier game company, right? Because you've got certain game companies that are huge. You've got Queen Games, which cranks out a ton of games by just classic game designers, but they're not that well produced all the time. And the components can sometimes be shoddy. And then you've got companies like CMON or Awakened Realms, which have a fantastic quality behind them, but they're producing these like $300 to $500 games, which are just out of some people's price range. And sometimes, very objectively, there's just so much bloat to those games that are unnecessary. But they're gorgeous and they're neat, But more and more we're seeing some of these companies that are kind of on their way up, and they're more smaller to medium style game companies, and they're producing really solidly designed, gorgeous looking games. And maybe at some point I'll do a video on some of these game companies, because I think they need to be acknowledged. And I think over the next 5 to 10 years, they're going to be making a lot of the games that people are playing because they're within people's budgeting, but they're really nice looking games and they're really well designed. And anyway, Glen Drover, you're the man, Glen. You keep your eye on Glen Drover because he's making good stuff. Another game you should be keeping your eye on or take a look at is Arkwright, the card game. And this one ends on September 3rd, as well as the 3 games after it that I'm going to be talking about. So just keep that in your little brain, September 3rd, for this one and the next 3 games. Now, I've been aware of Arkwright. I have a friend that I play really heavy games with who always talked about Arkwright. And Arkwright is a economic stock manipulation game, and it's really, really heavy. He would always say to me, like, you would love Arkwright. We have to play Arkwright. And we just never got around to it, and then the pandemic hit. But Arkwright, if you look at the complexity score on Board Game Geek, it's 4.67. Now, that scale only goes to 5, and you are going to be hard-pressed to find many games that are within the 4 range. Just because even complex games, not everybody agrees how complex they are. So you get a few lower votes on there, and that score, gets pulled down into the 3s. So a lot of the heaviest games out there, a lot of the Lacerdas or Mind Clash games, they're still in the 3s. So Arkwright is a 4.67, which for a lot of game players, that is way beyond them. Some people can't understand that. Other people just choose to not want to understand that. They're like, I want to play a game. I don't need to go take a graduate level science or math class, which is what this game feels like to me. So Arkwright, the card game, then, may be the game for you, because it is a simplified version of Arkwright, and it's a card game. So it doesn't have all of the components. It doesn't have all of the systems of the original Arkwright game. It's pared back. It's had the design tweaked, in some cases to simplify it, but I think in some cases too, just, once the designer made one game and that's been out there in the world a while and he sees how things work, he can also improve upon certain things. So Arkwright, the card game, is a combination of that. It's a simplifying, it's an improvement, and it's a changing of a system from a big board game to a smaller card game. Now, this is a game that I would be backing this one 100%, except I think I want the actual Arkwright board game. I think I want that really complex board game because that is my wheelhouse. And right now, that's the only thing that's stopping me from backing Arkwright the card game. But it may be different enough that there may be room for both of those games in someone's collection. And it may be something that appeals to people who don't want to deal with that much heavier version, or who want something that's a little smaller and more portable. So if you fall into any of those categories, check out Arkwright the card game. Again, it has the fact that it's a redesign by the same designer, Stefan Risthaus, means that he's coming back to this after the fact, and he's improving upon it. So you can pretty much guarantee that this is going to be a really solidly designed game. This is not a first-time publisher. This is not a first-time designer. This is not even a first-time design of a game. This is an improvement to a game and a simplification. Oh, I should also just mention that it is a loan game and a stockholding game. So for people who like economic games, stockholding games, loan games, definitely go check this one out. And the art on the cards, I think it's gorgeous for this game. Really, really nice card art. I personally am still on the fence with this one. As I said, I think I want the original Arkwright game. I don't know if having that one negates the need for the other one. But even if I do get the other one, I think I might want to get the card game just because it's smaller. It'll be easier to teach. It's probably better for traveling. So we'll see. But it's definitely a game I think you might want to take a look at. Another game that's kind of a smaller card game is called Lunar Base. And Lunar Base, this one is from a first-time game company and first-time designers. So those are things that you need to take into account when you're backing something. This is not a tried and true company or game designers. Now that said, Lunar Base to me looks really, really cool. The design on the cards, I mean, you'll have to take a look at it, but it looks really, really neat. It's got these cards that it's a very nice kind of like the font and the design of the cards. And then there are these orbs, half orbs on all sides of the cards. And essentially you're drafting cards and you're using resources to kind of build out a tableau. And as you do, the cards kind of connect, and you can either connect cards where there are orbs of the same color. So I think there's red, blue, yellow, gray, maybe green. And gray is a wild. So you can always put two orbs together of the same color or of a color and gray. So like a red and a gray, those two halves could go together, but you couldn't do, say, a red and a blue. So gray can go with anything, or anything can match with its own color. So you're building this tableau. I think it's kind of space themed, although the theme doesn't really seem important, and it essentially feels like kind of an abstract game. And the win conditions are variable in this. So you're either looking to get 20 credits, you're looking to have 10 colonist icons on the cards in your tableau, you're looking to have 5 scientific achievements, or 4 influence cards in the hand, in your card of hands. Any one of those situations will end the game. And I like that about it. I like that it has like 4 different win conditions, and I think there's room for a lot of different kind of strategy and tactics when you're kind of like juggling these multiple systems. And again, I like the design of the cards. But you should know that it is like a smaller game. It's kind of a card game. And again, I think it's a cheaper price. I'm not sure if I'll back this one. I need to think about this one a little bit more. I'm not sure if I need smaller card games right now at this point in time. But for what it is, it looks really neat. I really do want to play it, and I'm still considering it as a back. That one also is September 3rd. And so is Nova Lux. So Nova Lux is a resource management game and an engine building game, and it's supposed to play in like 15 minutes. And I'm sure it has a cheaper price tag on it as well. Now, it's in some ways, it's kind of a cube pusher because there's kind of a modular board of tiles, and a lot of these tiles are kind of all about converting one set of resources to another. So maybe you pay one resource, but then you get 3 resources back. In that sense, it's very kind of, like if that was all there was to it, I would say it's a very generic seeming game mechanically. But where it goes from there is that as you're looking at these tiles, they have kind of like almost like a clock face on them with a series of numbers. Maybe it's like a 1 to 7, which means that transaction can be done up to 7 times by different players. And anytime that resource conversion happens, you move a little cube kind of along the line of numbers. So if it started at 7, maybe like there's 6 uses left, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, as people do this. When it gets down to the end of this, number of conversions, the tile comes out of the game and then there's another tile behind it. And I like that idea of taking the resource management part of it and then adding this like certain number of times you can do it, and then having like more tiles revealed with other functions. It's I think it brings enough kind of variability in gameplay to it to be fascinating to me, while still being essentially kind of a resource conversion game and a resource management game. But I like this design. It's very, very appealing to me. And the fact that you do have these choices, it still plays in 15 minutes. I don't know if the 15 minutes will really be able to hold true, but even if it's a 20 to 30 minute game, it seems like you could probably teach it in 5 minutes. So it could be a great, game to have where you can kind of just whip it out. If you only have a half an hour left in a game night and you're looking for something that you can still fit in, if you're near the end of the night and you don't have a lot of time, that will still offer you some impactful choices. The last game that is ending its Kickstarter on 9/3 is Ultimate Werewolf Extreme. Now, I am not a huge social game player, party game, social deduction. For my money, though, if the games I like in those in that genre is more like Dixit or Bang the Dice game. I really am not a fan of Coup or The Resistance or some of those games where you're doing kind of a lot of voting. And I'm just telling you this to kind of like help you understand my tastes, so then you can make a better judgment of when I tell you something, where you take that. But the reason I don't like those games is I've been playing those games where, someone is like, oh, we have to figure out 3 people to go out on this mission, and then we'll see if it succeeds or not. And you might have a table of 10 people, and some of those people getting selected for those missions can often be the same people. So some of those players at that table can end up not really playing much game while they're playing this game. I do not like that about those games. Secret Hitler, that's another one. So I don't like the way it can leave players out for a large part of the game. I also don't feel like there's a lot of choices that gets made in those games. I feel like those games are kind of on rails and they play themselves, and I feel like your enjoyment of that game is really going to depend on the group that you're playing with more than the game. Now, all that said, the games that I like the most of these types of games, for me, there's a game called Shadow Hunters, which gives people kind of variable powers, and there's a little bit of a board to it, and you're trying to figure out, what faction different players are in. And it adds a few other mechanics that I think mixes it up and makes the game interesting enough to me that I would rather play, that than those other games that I mentioned. And there's a game called, I think, Salem. I think it's 1492. I could be wrong about the date, but I don't mind that one as much either, because you have a certain number of kind of check marks, and you might be a witch or you might not, and people are all kind of like witches in the town of Salem. They're trying to figure out, well, some of the players are witches, other players are not. It's a social deduction game. So you're trying to figure out who are the witches and kill the witches before they infect the entire group. So that one I don't mind as much. And I suppose the third one I don't mind as much is the werewolf games. Now, if you don't know the Werewolf games, generally what happens is there has to be one player who's kind of running the game, and there'll be a section where everybody, hides their eyes for the night. Something happens, and if you are one of the evil people, you keep your eyes open and you know who each other are, and then things happen, and people, look at their individual player powers, and they're trying to figure out who their player ability cards. They're trying to figure out who the werewolf is before it kills them, or the werewolves. What makes this special is that there's app integration in the game, and there's been app integration more and more in the werewolf games. Even in this version, you still do need a player to run the game, because you need that one person present who can see the players and see who is a wolf and who isn't, and kind of run the game. So that hasn't gone away, but there is more now that the app can handle in terms of like knowing which players are which roles, and it kind of manages health, it manages all those kinds of things. So there is greater app integration, and also this is a game where they've put out so many versions of it, and they keep adding to it and they keep improving it. And I don't know if Ultimate Werewolf Extreme is going to be the end-all, be-all, final version of the game, the Ultimate Edition that you should definitely buy, but it's a pretty good one. And at this point in time, it's as complete, I think, as you would need. So if you are looking to pick up a werewolf game and you like it, and you want to get one of the best ones out there with the most stuff, this is maybe something you should look at. Now, they do have a version which just comes with a ton of stuff, including what I refer to as vanity rewards. Vanity rewards are generally things where it's like you get your image drawn on a card, or you get your name printed on the box, or you get maybe an early prototype version of the game. But it's something that it kind of like appeals to your ego or your vanity, but it's not really essential to the game in any way. It certainly doesn't affect gameplay, but a lot of times it's even different from a cosmetic upgrade. Like, it's better than nicer components. As I said, oftentimes it's like getting your image on a card or your name in a rule book or on the box. So that's why I call it a vanity reward. And they do have a pledge level for this werewolf campaign. That's like $500, which is way more than anyone ever needs to spend on a werewolf game. Unless you have a lot of disposable, money to burn and you really, really love werewolf. I mean, you can get things like 25 slap bracelets and 25, there's a lot of stuff. You can look at the pledge and see, but there's a lot of extras that are very non-essential. However, in that pack, I'm sure there are also a lot of extras that are really cool, that really, really expand the game and give you different options. Even in the lowest pledge level, you can reportedly play 3 different versions of Ultimate Werewolf simultaneously. So, if you had a family reunion or a huge group, or you're going to a convention or something, someone could theoretically be running 3 different games of Ultimate Werewolf simultaneously with the components that come with this. And that is not just the $500 version. That's the minimum funding package. And there are several different pledge levels in between. So I'm sure if you are excited by what I'm saying, you can go and find the pledge level that's going to most appeal to you and get you the extras that you need without extra stuff you don't feel like you want. The last game that we'll be talking about today is Glenmore 2 Highland Games. Now, Glenmore 2 was a redesign and I guess it's like an evolution of the previous Glenmore. The original Glenmore, the first game, was supposed to be a great game, but it was very low printing and very hard to find. And so last year they did Glenmore 2, which was a sequel game, but also a reprinting, reimagining of the first game. And essentially it's a engine building game that uses tiles. There's a way that you can kind of draft or take tiles, which is sort of like a time track. So much like with Tutankhamun, you can either move forward on the track and get the thing that you really, really want, but in doing that, you might leave many spaces below it available for players to take multiple tiles, or you yourself can grab maybe several tiles in a row that maybe aren't everything they may not be the best tile, but you can pick up several things. So part of the puzzle of the game is figuring out what's the best strategy for you to do in tile taking at the time. And then there's just ways that once you do have the tiles and you're kind of building your tableau, the way that the tiles work off each other and synchronize off each other. And in a lot of ways, it reminds me of Keyflower, where everyone's kind of building their own little tableau of tiles and trying to create their own highest functioning tableau. Now, the cool thing about Glen 2, which I have yet to play, so I'm just telling you from what I know about it, is that it came with a group of chronicles. That's what they called it, chronicles. Each of these were like a mini expansion that you could add to the game. And they were sort of like thematically different, and they added different mechanics. And from what I know, they were all pretty darn cool. And you could play with any one of these, just adding it into the game, or all of them. Although they do each add different mechanics, and they kind of add time to the runtime of the game. So if you threw in all 8, you'd be looking at probably a fairly long and unwieldy game. So you probably wouldn't want to do that unless everyone playing had experience with all of the chronicles. But just the fact that it has all these mini expansions, and that all of them, from what I've heard, are really, really cool, and they add in different kind of mechanics and add variability, had me really excited. And I also feel like it does, as I said, it functions on a level of Keyflower, which is, as I mentioned at the top of this video, one of those very, very solid kind of medium weight games that can appeal to both lighter games and not be too hard to learn, but also apply to heavier gamers and give them lots of meaningful choices. And I think for a game like that, you can bring everybody together in that middle ground. So Highland Games is a follow-up Kickstarter, and they're adding 4 new chronicles, so 4 new modules. Now the first one is a solo mode, which for a lot of people is pretty necessary, right? There are a lot of people who love solo gameplay. And in the original Glen 2 Chronicles, you did not have the ability to play solo. So this allows you to play, I believe, all of the original Chronicles and the original base game solo mode. And then there are 3 more additional Chronicles. One of them has to do with overbuilding buildings, planning and overbuilding monuments, and that sounds appealing to me. Another one to do, which seems a little odd, but I like it, is you're training an athlete, and you're kind of taking them through the training process. And as I said, I haven't even played the base game yet, and I don't know how this is going to integrate with it, but I like the idea. And it's by Johnny Pack, who I think is kind of on the ups as a designer. He's designed some really cool games. One of his early designs called Hightown was redesigned into Coloma, and then he also has a game called Sierra West, and he's been doing a few different things, and I think in the next few years he's going to become a very prolific designer, and I'm really just intrigued by this like focus on an athlete and training and how they make that balance with the rest of the game. And then the last thing is, I think this one's by Rudiger Dorn, and it allows for end of round bonus scoring. So that would be a way to definitely throw a lot of variability into the game. So those are 8 Kickstarters that are all available right now. And, depending on what you like in games, I think they're all really, really, worthy of your taking a close look at them. And if you're someone who's buying games and, who's not afraid to back Kickstarters, I think they're all games that you probably should be aware of. So you've made it through to the end of the video. Congratulations. No, I really appreciate it. And if you're here, I'm assuming some of the things I said had value for you. And I'd really appreciate it if you could like the video, subscribe, and then hit the alarm bell so you can get notified when I put out further videos. And just a reminder, we're going to have another monthly update video next month on the 7th, and then again on the 21st. And those will be these videos where I'm talking about games that are on Kickstarter. And I will also be talking about games that I played a little bit. And I will also be talking about games that have arrived and I've added to my collection, as well as games that I've backed. And you'll get 2 of those videos in September. But I will also be producing a few other videos in the next month. I know one of them is either going to be a review, impressions, or teach video for Fort. I just haven't decided which one to do yet. And I'll also have probably a review video for Exit the Abandoned Cabin. And then I've been planning for a while to do a video on a Teach for the Seventh Continent, as well as a campaign playthrough for the Seventh Continent. So you can be looking forward to those 4 videos in the next 4 to 6 weeks, along with 2 more monthly update videos. And if anything that I'm saying to you now has resonated with you, with the games that I'm talking about, please feel free in the comments below to request teach videos or campaign playthrough videos or review impressions videos. Those are all definitely on the table, and I very much would like your input moving forward in terms of the content that I'm going to be producing. So one last time, thank you very, very much for watching. I really, really do appreciate your time and support. Thank you.